welcome. You can thank me afterwards, perhaps, to see if it's any good. I was just reflecting. It's so nice to have a Judaism come last in the Abrahamic religions, because usually it's always Judaism, then Christianity, then Islam. So it's now Judaism can be the religion that supersedes the other two. So I'm trying to think. I was just I know Moshe Del couldn't be here, and I was thinking it would be a real shame if Judaism or Jewish mysticism wasn't part of our deliberations today and our conversation tomorrow. So in the spirit, or maybe in the letter of inclusion, I figured I would give some what I consider to be rather idiosyncratic comments about Jewish mysticism. Comments that probably wouldn't be the same ones Moshe Del would offer, because he spent his life studying that tradition, whereas I've always come at the Jewish mystical tradition, or maybe better, Jewish mystical traditions through other aspects, such as philosophy or the critical study of religion. So I think a few comments are probably worthy. I made my notes here during the first two presentations while still trying to be engaged with them. The first thing that I think we need to remember is that Christianity and Islam are world religions, with the realization that the term world religions is only a 19th century invention. Judaism is many things, but a world religion it ain't. I think perhaps on the grand scheme of things, it might just beat out Zoroastrianism as one of the smaller religions in the world. And how it came to be called the universal religion is actually of some interest. I think Judaism was elevated to the ranks of world religions because both Christianity and Islam needed it in that rubric to make sense of themselves. The other thing that I think we have to remember is that Christianity and Islam are universal, small c Catholic traditions. And again, Judaism is many things, but universal and Catholic, small c Catholic, it isn't. Although, as I'll talk about in my presentation tomorrow, there's a real tension in Judaism between universal elements and particularistic elements. I think it's safe to say that Judaism, for a variety of historical reasons, is particularistic. It doesn't seek out converts. It doesn't want to make the world Jewish. Except maybe through humor, but other than that, so I think we have to remember that Judaism is a very particularistic tradition, which will of course have repercussions on Jewish mysticism. The third thing that I think helps us make sense of Jewish mysticism and Judaism more generally is that Judaism, or Jew, let's focus on Jew, not Judaism, but Jew, that is someone who is a practitioner of Judaism, is both a religious individual and not just that, and not even that, but a Jew is also a marker of ethnicity. So I don't think Muslim is a marker of ethnicity, or Christian is a marker of ethnicity, but Jew is both someone who is, it doesn't have to be either or, it is either or. So one can be a devout religious Jew, and by definition is ethnically Jewish, or one can be a Jew and not practice religion at all. So one can be a secular or an atheistic Jew. So I think that will also help us understand something of Jewish mysticism, that particularity and the idea of ethnicity, even though aware that ethnicity is a modern concept, is not something that would have existed in late antiquity, which is when Jewish mysticism began. So let me just begin with 2 points, just to bring the two earlier speakers together. I love what Anne said about, you said how mysticism takes central themes of the religion and intensifies them, or intensifies speculation on them. I like that concept. I think we'll certainly see that in Jewish mysticism. If you think of the major features of Judaism, everything from circumcision to the Hebrew language, to God, to the commandments, these receive an inordinate amount of time and energy in Jewish mystical speculation. The second point is if we go to Erdő's point about the Sufism as this kind of universalizing aspect of Islam, certainly not the only one, but we think of, you mentioned love, and in Judaism, the mystical dimension is perhaps the most particularistic. It's Judaism at its most insular, at its most xenophobic, and at its most misogynist. And I also like how you said about the importance of love in the Christian mystical tradition, love in the Islamic mystical traditions. The term love doesn't receive a lot of attention in Jewish mysticism for a variety of reasons. The emphasis is, and I think this goes back to the fact that if we go, speaking of supersessionism, is to talk about Paul's critique of Christianity, that of Judaism, is that for him, Christianity represents the spirit of the law, whereas Judaism represents the letter of the law. Well, I completely disagree with that as a sentiment. I think we have to think that Jewish mysticism focuses a lot on the performance of the commandments. And we think of the commandments, we tend to think of the 10 commandments, but in traditional rabbinic Judaism, there's not 10 commandments, there are 613 commandments. So a religious Jew, Orthodox religious Jew's life is spent in and with the commandments. So action becomes more important than belief. So now to take these sort of general themes and try to introduce them with some of the major texts and ideas behind Jewish mysticism according to me, okay, so Jewish mysticism begins, I mean, as you say with this, you can't understand Sufism without understanding the Quran, you can't perhaps understand Christian mysticism without understanding the Christian Bible. You can't understand the emergence or the importance of Jewish mysticism without, again, understanding the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh. Two of the most mystical texts that received a lot of subsequent speculation in Jewish mysticism are Isaiah 6, Isaiah's vision of the throne, and that idea of vision, I think, is important, as is throne. And the second is Ezekiel 1 with his vision of the chariot. In Hebrew, it's Merkavah. So the earliest iteration of Jewish mysticism subsequent to those two texts is known as Merkavah and Hekhalot mysticism. The mysticism associated with the chariot and Ezekiel's vision of the chariot, and Hekhalot with the palaces as seen in Isaiah. Questions such as, what did they see? What did Isaiah and what did Ezekiel see? And the early Jewish mystics, known as Yordei HaMerkavah, or literally the people that descended to the chariot. Notice it's interesting, it's descend to the chariot as opposed to ascend to the chariot. What did the people who descend to the chariot, what did they see? So a lot of the earliest Jewish texts, which date to the late antique period, deal with warnings, with incantations to help protect the Yordei Merkavah, the people who are descending to the Merkavah, to protect them from danger, from demons and this kind of thing. And a lot of these Merkavah and Hekhalot texts are extremely, I think using our term, we would say nonsensical. They're very hard to get into. They're very hard to understand. There's a lot of formulaic expressions, one of the major features I'll talk about in a second is the Hebrew language. So a lot of it is just playing with the language, using the various letters to make these nonsensical statements. So I think that's the first thing. So that's the first iteration of Jewish mysticism. The second iteration of Jewish mysticism is known as, I guess we often call it now, classical Kabbalah, or Kabbalah, depending on your pronunciation. Kabbalah literally means tradition. And so the classical, perhaps it's interesting, that classical Kabbalah and the text most famously associated with it, the Sefer HaZohar, or the Book of Splendor, dates to Muslim Spain, or Al-Andalus, and emerges roughly the same time as Maimonides, the great rationalist in Judaism. There are two different paradigms, radically different paradigms. If Maimonides, the philosopher, represents Judaism at its most universal, the Sefer HaZohar represents Judaism at its most particular. But if Maimonides, the ideal of Judaism is silent contemplation, in which one simply reads Aristotle or reads Al-Farabi or Avicenna and ponders the mysteries of metaphysics, the Zohar gives a new paradigm. It involves the average Jew in a divine drama. So it's much more interesting for the average person. So the Sefer Zohar represents a mystical commentary on the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. So it's actually divided. I don't know how familiar you are with Judaism, but the Torah is divided into weekly portions so that it's read during a yearly cycle. The Sefer Zohar is also divided into the same subsections, and one reads, and still does in especially Hasidic or ultra-Orthodox communities, one still reads the Torah portion with the portion from the Sefer HaZohar. So if Maimonides believes that the key to salvation is to read Aristotle and understand Aristotelian metaphysics, the Zohar opens up a world, a different world for the average Jew who doesn't read Aristotle, doesn't read all the Arabic and Hebrew commentaries on Aristotle. It's a much more realistic and perhaps I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, ontological approach to it. So that's one theme. Mysticism, Jewish mysticism as a response to Jewish philosophy, and Jewish mysticism as much more, it offers a Jewish paradigm as opposed to a non-Jewish paradigm, which Maimonides does. The second thing that we have to remember is that as I said earlier, Jewish mysticism, which is sometimes just called Kabbalah, but even, I've tried to show already just Kabbalah is but one aspect of Jewish mysticism, represents Judaism at its most particular. And here I think it's really the opposite of Sufism or Christian mysticism. According to Sefer Zohar and later Kabbalistic texts, non-Jewish souls come from the Sitra Achra, or the other side. So there's this distinction between Jewish souls and non-Jewish souls. And non-Jewish souls are the source of problems for Jews. So that's one idea, that the Jewish mysticism as very particularistic. Another point I want to make is that in Jewish mysticism, language is paramount. The Hebrew language. It's a sacred language. It's the language that God used to create, not just metaphorically, but literally create the world. And because of that, Jewish mystics are very much interested in language, the manipulation of language. They feel that through manipulation of language, and this takes us back to the incantations that we saw in some of the early texts, one creates worlds. You've heard of the golem, for example, these homunculi that the mystic brings to life by uttering spells of the Hebrew language over it. So language is extremely important. In fact, it's often strange in these contexts in North America or in Europe, where we talk about Kabbalah, we're talking about a tradition that believes in the absolute sacrality of the Hebrew language in profane languages, like in German or in English or in French. Another aspect of Jewish mysticism is the divine names of God. So we know, God, but in the Hebrew Bible, there's all kinds of different names for God, including the most important one, which is the Yod He Vav He. I probably shouldn't say this in a talk on Kabbalah, but which we sometimes pronounce Yahweh or Jahweh, which of course is the for a Kabbalist, you can never pronounce the name of God. But a lot of mystical speculation in the Kabbalah is about trying to figure out, trying to understand the various names of God and how they relate to reality. So again, we kind of see this triangulation, I think, between the divine names of God, not just the divine name, but the divine names, the Hebrew language, and as strange as this may seem, the circumcised male penis. Circumcised male penis. So this is so Kabbalah is very particularistic. It's also very misogynistic. It can be sometimes quite homoerotic, and there's this relationship between the Orthodox, between the male with the circumcised penis as the only way to getting access into the secrets of the Hebrew language, which in turn reveal the building blocks of creation through which one can ascend or descend, using the Yordam Merkavah, to the divine name of God. And another important, and I want to just add to put up on the screen, another important aspect of Kabbalistic mysticism is, whoops, I don't think I did it right, is this. This is the Sefirotic Tree. I think they call it here a version of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. So here, according to Kabbalah, this is the divine world. And we seem sort of static on a page, but for the Kabbalist, these things are constantly moving. So this is essentially sometimes referred to as the body of God, which has male and female aspects. So down at the bottom, Malchut, this represents the female aspect of God. The left side, where Bina, Din, and Hod come from, this is seen as the punishing aspect of God, and the side on the right is seen as the nurturing aspect of God. And one of the problems, according to Jewish mysticism, both in the Zohar and in the subsequent Lurianic Kabbalistic tradition, is that because of the sin of Adam, this world has problems. This world is in disarray. So this kind of leads us to another aspect of Jewish mysticism, and I think why it became so much more popular than the philosophical one, which is just based on reading Aristotle and contemplating metaphysics, is the average Jew here and now has a role to play in repairing God. So every action that one does in this world has a bearing on that world. So when you perform the commandments, you affect God. When you don't perform the commandments, you adversely affect God. Even the sexual act on Sabbath between a kosher male and a kosher woman, married, etc., is the Malkut is the feminine aspect of God, and the Tiferet is the male aspect of God, which is often symbolized by the penis. So when a Kabbalistic couple performs sexual relations on the Sabbath, they're bringing these two elements of God back into order with one another. There. Oh, it shows up on here, but not there. Do you see that? It's so odd. I think we can leave. I think you. Oh, now it's back up. Okay. The other thing, so the other aspect which also leads to this repair of the world, this bringing the divine world back into order. So you see that. So the average Jew, according to Kabbalah, is involved in this cosmic drama in which he or she is able to repair the divine world through their actions down here. Again, much more visceral. I think that's what I was looking for before. Much more visceral than the silent contemplation of Maimonides. So another important aspect of the Kabbalah is the importance of performing the commandments. So one performs the commandments not simply for the sake of performing the commandments, but for the sake of repairing the divine world. Okay, I'm just trying to think if there's anything more that I wanted to say. So those are kind of, for me, and I mean, I don't think I'm alone in saying that, those are kind of the major aspects of the Jewish mystical tradition. So what I try to do is give you some major aspects, maybe put them in counterpoint with the Christian and the Islamic traditions, and also show, again, I go back to the point, I hope you made that point, Anne, where you said that the idea that the mystical traditions intensify things that are already in the tradition. And I think we completely see this in Judaism, everything from the particularism to the focus on the male, to the particularism. It's not trying to, it's, if we think of Sufism as, sort of Islam at its most open to the world, trying to bring people into it. We see the Kabbalah as seeing the outside world, especially the non-Jewish world, as a problem. So it becomes very particular. And I mean, the best, I don't know if any of you have been to New York City, when you walk in where there's a Jewish neighborhood, or even not, if you're just by NYU and Greenwich Village, you'll always have a Hasidic Jew come up to you and say, "Are you Jewish?" Anyone had this experience? Yeah. Okay, you've had this experience. And they'll say, I have a great answer for them now, because they bug me so much. I now say, "I'm not, but my mom is." And I keep walking. And by the time they figured it out, they're like, "Oh." So they always, and they say, if you say, "No, I'm not Jewish," they'll say, "Oh, thank you, have a good day." But if they say, if you say, "Yeah, I'm Jewish," they'll say, have you put on tefillin today?" Which are the prayer things that Orthodox Jews wear. And I think that is telling, because on the one hand it shows that they're not interested in non-Jews, whereas I think if we saw a Christian mystic or a Sufi were in New York, they'd be like, "Hey, you want to come to our dhikr session, or do you want to come to church," or something like this. The Chabad says, "We're not interested in you if you're not Jewish." And then but that idea of, let's think of that by getting a secular Jew to put on tefillin, for them, they're trying to right the world, right? They're trying to add to that. They're trying to get that person to be part of this cosmic drama. Of course, once they put tefillin on you, then they leave you. But the idea is that Jews will become more religious, will marry Jewish women, and that through that, this world will gradually be put right. So maybe just to finish, according to the Jewish mystical tradition, the average Jew has a major role to play in messianic redemption. And I think that's as probably good as, now I'm just going to start making nonsense, I'm repeating myself, but I think that's as good an introduction to Jewish mysticism that I can give with 5 minutes notice. Thank you.